Hello there. Today we are talking about something that I have found to be pretty transformative. It's yoga therapy. When I opened my office and studio a few years ago with the words yoga and therapy on the sign, people expressed a mix of curiosity and confusion. While having these words together on my door made a world of sense to me, I also fully understood how people wouldn't know what this meant or what to expect. I had had the experience of really finding yoga during grad school, a time when I didn't know how stressed and anxious I was until I suddenly felt some relief from it in a yoga class. Maybe it was more like a breakdown shortly followed by relief, but there was relief and there were also tears. And I really wasn't a crier back then. I didn't judge a crier, I just rarely felt reason to cry. I also didn't know how out of touch I was with how I actually felt, but that's a story for another day. The experience I had in that studio had me quickly sign up to be a studio assistant, which meant waking up at 5 a.m. to pedal my butt to the studio, open the doors, and get the heat going before the 6 a.m. class in the dead of winter. And I stuck with it. And then I started training because I wanted so badly to be able to share what I was doing with the people that I was working with. I went to weekend workshops all around New England, and soon after graduation from my master's program, I dove headfirst into my first full on teacher training program. What I quickly learned was that an unimaginable amount of the learning that I had taken away from my degree program was being reflected in what I was learning in those yoga studies. Practices that are meant to still the mind, to balance the mood, practices for self exploration, for self awareness, for waking up and knowing how we want to live and how we can take better care of ourselves. And I could talk all day just about that piece, but not here today, because today we are here to talk about yoga and psychology, about the therapeutic uses of yoga and the intersection of these East and West approaches to our mind and our lives. This is In Our Skin, and I'm Ashley McCann. For over 16 years, I've worn the hats of therapist and yoga teacher and worked to bring these worlds together for my clients as much as possible. Today, I'm really looking forward to sharing why this feels so valuable to me. I hope you find some great takeaways, and of course, if you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to me and do just that. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. I think I was lucky to come upon yoga when I did. Research was just hitting the mainstream and starting to show us the effectiveness of these practices in the realm of mental health. And back then, that mattered to me a lot because before I knew a lot about yoga, I knew a lot about mental health. And in my generalist knowledge, I thought of yoga as most people do, something that was about your body and fitness, which for people with eating disorders isn't terribly helpful in most cases. The first place I began to teach actually was in a residential treatment center. It was where I was working back when I lived in Cambridge, and I was offering yoga as one of the many groups that I ran there each week. At the time, I didn't realize I had actually been teaching yoga for years, having learned how to move people through meditation for the management of chronic pain when I was working at the Mind Body Medicine Center back at the University of Vermont. The woman that I worked with there was a brilliant psychiatrist. She was also a Spitfire and still is one of the most impressive women that I know today. Sidebar, I have to tell you, she once told me that I smile too much and that people will not take me seriously. And I still can't stop smiling, and I know people probably don't take me seriously. But she was also Polish, and maybe it was a cultural thing. Either way, I loved and respected her, and I could tell you stories about her all day long. So again, we'll save it for another day. But this woman knew what she was doing. She was a psychiatrist who could have been prescribing these people medication for their pain regularly, and she was where it was necessary and appropriate, which was for, unfortunately, almost all of these people. But she started a program to see if something else would work. She had us using various meditative practices to help people with chronic pain, and the results of her research were amazing. Using these practices that were short and sweet, most of them less than 5 minutes long, the people involved found not only a decline in their pain, but an improvement in their mood and quality of life. Back then, I didn't recognize that what I was teaching was yoga because in my Western naivete, I just thought yoga was a bunch of poses that were strung together. And back then, the yoga that I was practicing often left me feeling like I was going to throw up or die. I was in sweaty, hot, carpeted rooms full of people who attended religiously. Sometimes I'd feel great, and sometimes that was because I felt good at it, which is really not the point. And if anything, it was moving me further from the intended benefits of any yogic practice. But we'll get to all that in a minute. The point is, even years later, all of the trainings that I was attending were still actually burying the lead on yoga. They were showing me yoga through a very narrow, westernized lens. I was learning that yoga was a string of poses in a sequence that was likely to be trademarked. And it wasn't until a few years later that my eyes were truly open to the depth and breadth of yoga's scope. And I finally started to get this in the years following my study and training in psychology. My mind was blown when I started to learn more. Yogic texts include practices and descriptions that are quite like cognitive behavioral therapy. I could see how many of my favorite dialectical behavior therapy skills had a yogic bent, and on it went. Yoga expanded more and more, and I was learning how to apply it much like the skills and introspective practices I had learned and was teaching my clients. And at times, I will tell you, yoga offered an even more clear and direct path. So I completed that 200-hour teacher training. And then a couple of years later, a 300-hour teacher training. And then a trauma-informed yoga training, and on until the pandemic hit, and I did yet another 300-hour training because I think we all needed a little something extra to manage our existence back then. You know what I mean? What I was learning was quickly getting backed up by research. The practice of yoga, with its origins rooted in ancient India, has transcended cultural boundaries to become a global phenomenon. This has a definite shadow side, marked by commodification and cultural appropriation. And on the other side of that, these Eastern practices have offered us so much. Today, I'll shed light on both sides of that coin. Over the past few decades, its integration has gone beyond studio spaces to begin to enter into mental health care. This has gained momentum in part due to the support of that growing body of research that has shown time and again the many ways in which yoga promotes psychological well-being. The integration of yoga into Western psychology has provided skills, practices, knowledge, and a multitude of resources to enhance our mental health and our emotional well-being. This is the convergence of ancient practices and modern science, and it's offering holistic approaches to address stress, anxiety, depression, even trauma. I'm guessing that you're beginning to hear the message that yoga is more than those fancy movements on a mat. And we're here to talk about how it's a kind of therapy in and of itself, or perhaps many kinds of therapies. So let's break it on down. Yoga originated in ancient India. And when I say ancient, I mean 5,000 years of old kind of ancient. So significantly predated spandex. Can you believe it? Yoga is a truly comprehensive system. And classically and traditionally, there were several different paths and approaches, each of them providing different focuses and benefits for us mentally, physically, and emotionally. I want to share these with you because I find that they are little known and each is wildly beneficial in its offerings. These are not the paths of yoga that you likely hear about here in the United States, though you might have heard of some other trademarked style of vinyasa. These paths are quite different. So here they are. Raja Yoga is the path of mental control or meditation. An example of this is the eightfold path of Ashtanga, where we look at those 8 limbs that you may or may not have heard of, but you'll hear me talk about in the future. These are ethical disciplines called the yamas and niyamas, the physical postures, which are the asana, breath control, which is pranayama, the withdrawal of the senses, which is pratyahara, concentration, dharana, meditation, dhyana, and ultimately, spiritual absorption, samadhi. The next is karma yoga, and this is the path of action that is selfless service and action without attachment to outcomes. This type of yoga encourages individuals to act according to their dharma or their duty and to dedicate the fruits of their actions to the divine. This path of yoga encourages individuals to act according to their dharma or duty, which does differ than the way in which we might think of dharma or purpose in our Western culture. And it dedicates those actions toward cultivating detachment and spiritual freedom. In this type of yoga, you might see people working through the lens of what we refer to as mindfulness and selflessness. Bhakti yoga is the path of devotion. It focuses on love and devotion toward the divine, surrendering ourselves to a higher power. And practices here might look like prayer or ritual, chanting, and cultivating love and compassion for all beings. Jnana yoga is the path of knowledge. This is one of intellectual inquiry and self realization through wisdom, which comes through study. So, in this path of yoga, people are studying a lot of the ancient texts and trying to understand life and meaning and actualization and connection to the spiritual through that study. Mantra yoga is the path of transformation through sound vibration. Mantra yoga involves the repetition of sacred sounds, words, phrases that help us concentrate the mind and connect to higher levels of energy. Tantra yoga is the path of ritual and energy. Tantra does not mean what most Americans might associate it with, but it is about harnessing and channeling energy for spiritual growth. And the last is Hatha yoga. This translates to forceful or willful path, but I'll tell you the word hatha actually comes from the union of the words for sun and moon. It is the joining of opposites. So while we hear the forceful and willful, I want you to know that the discipline within hatha yoga isn't about just forcing the body. It does use asana, or the physical postures, and pranayama, breath work, to prepare the body and mind for higher states of meditation. So the goal isn't about control of the physical body, but it's about basically getting the body and the mind to a place where meditation becomes more possible. A lot of the yoga in the US was bred from this path of yoga, and it's lost a lot of its meaning and initial intention. So within these, there's a lot of overlap, each sharing meditation practices, and with each an overarching intention of, and I'm taking liberties on my interpretation here, of helping us become more self aware so that we can be less self involved and we can tap into something bigger while also being immensely less stressed and anxious and much more able to cope, because each is literally a set of practices that are exactly that. They're coping skills. The movements, the breathing, the mantras, meditation, the rituals, they're all there as a way for humans to get through with less mind chatter, less physical pain, more concentration, a better ability to focus, to attend to the right thing at the right time, and so much more. And they were naming these as the goals and the benefits long before our research came along. These were tried and true. Remember, 5,000 years old. They did their research. They did it on themselves through practice. And they were passed down by word of mouth from teacher to student, but truly in practice. And I say this because this is so important and I needed this. I wanted to read every book to have the understanding, which, one might confuse with that jnana yoga, which was like gathering knowledge through study. But my teacher said to me, no more books. You can do anything but read another book. And I was like, why? And I felt like I was in trouble. But he was like, all you have to do is pay attention, practice and pay attention. And that was so hard for me because I wanted to be doing something to accumulate the understanding, not actually practicing and getting to know myself and get out of my own patterns. For me, reading was a lot more comfortable. So you may have heard of all of this before or none of it, but regardless, I just wanted to make sure that it was clear. I wanted to share these because while I just outlined 6 different paths and thoughts and practices, each their own, none is solely focused on movement. Did you notice that? Kind of wild. Yoga, in its original and fullest form, has always been about so much more about self realization, management of the mind, reining in our behavior, about growth and transcendence, about the way we treat others and the way we treat ourselves. It was never about toning your butt. Some will say that this is a bonus, and I will say that could be true, but it is also a distraction from the bigger picture. So let's get back on track. Each of these paths can be practiced individually or in combination, depending on your goal or your spiritual inclination. Together, they're truly comprehensive, and much like the intention of Western psychology, they're aimed at well being. So while East and West approaches differ in their origin and in their methods, they also converge really nicely. Yoga's emphasis on mindfulness and self awareness aligns seamlessly with the psychological practices that I've already mentioned, like cognitive behavioral therapy and the ever increasing focus on mindfulness. For example, my favorite Yoga Sutra, which is the second in this ancient text, is Yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which translates to Yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. For me, this says it all in so few words. Yoga is intended to do the thing we are all trying to do every damn day: still our minds. The Yoga Sutras are an ancient text. They were written by the sage Patanjali over 2,000 years ago, and they're a collection of 196 aphorisms that outline the path of yoga. This is quite far from being a manual on physical postures. The sutras actually delve into the mind's workings, the nature of suffering, and the journey towards self realization. They offer a roadmap of sorts for achieving peace and freedom and addressing both the practical and the philosophical aspects of yoga. The sutras introduce the Eightfold Path, which I spoke briefly about a moment ago when we were talking about Raja Yoga. This serves as the backbone of a traditional yoga practice. And again, these are the limbs. The first is the yamas. These are ethical principles that are about how we interact with the world. They include things like nonviolence and truthfulness. The second is niyamas, which are self-disciplines. They're practices like contentment and self-study. The third is asana, those postures that we all know and love that are commonly associated with yoga today. The fourth is pranayama, breath control. The fifth is pratyahara, which is withdrawal of the senses. It's about turning inward to cultivate focus and self-awareness. The sixth is dharana, concentration. It's about training our mind to focus on a single point. And I'll tell you, I laugh because one of my teachers made the point that as humans, we're very good at focusing. We just might not be focusing on what we really want or should be focusing on right now. And I really appreciated that. So this is about training our focus, basically to pay attention to what we're paying attention to and to gain more of an ability to feel choice and control about that. The seventh is dhyana, which is about cultivating that meditative state, and samadhi is the final. This translates to absorption, but it's ultimately about unity with the self and the universe or the divine. So while modern yoga does a great job of emphasizing asana and pranayama, the other limbs are really amazing tools that I love to share about because they can help us navigate life's challenges and really deepen not only our practice of yoga, but our sense of self and our understanding of our choice and control over how we feel, about our behavior, and about things like we were just talking about: our attention, our concentration, our awareness. So I hope you're seeing that this is really about ways in which we can navigate life. And there are so many tools within it that allow us this. So, in a time in our world where distractions are everywhere and stress levels are at an all time high, the Yoga Sutras actually offer us an antidote. They remind us that yoga is more than a workout, more than something else to put on your schedule, but that it's a way of life that cultivates mindfulness and resilience and connection. The sutras teach us to live in the moment, free from the constant pull of regrets or future anxieties. It's all about mindfulness and presence. It teaches us that by practicing non attachment, we can cultivate stillness in ourselves that can help us navigate life's ups and downs with a greater sense of ease. That kind of emotional resilience that we all, I think, want to build in our lives. And with the integration of the physical and the mental and the spiritual practices, it gives us this more holistic approach to well being that we might not get just anywhere. And I have been talking about spirituality and the divine. I'm going to come back to that in the next episode. Because whether your spiritual beliefs align with those of Southeast Asia and their religious practices or not, you can bring your spiritual beliefs and practices to yoga. Just like we can combine the different types of classical yoga approaches, we can also combine what is relevant to our life into them. And how do we begin to do that? We don't have to know it all to begin. It can start with simply taking this more zoomed out perspective on what we are doing while we are on our mat. You remember how I said that starting to learn all this completely changed how I approached what I was doing on my mat? Well, I could still walk into any class in any studio. In the beginning, this was subtle. I simply started by thinking about the breath and the movement like a meditation, more intentional, with new purpose. And you're probably already doing this too. When you go into a class or into your workout, you're probably connecting it to why you need it. When you're feeling stressed or burnt out, when you're feeling down or needing to shake off something difficult, that's yoga. Practicing mindfulness, awareness, taming your mind. I don't care if you're doing the dishes. If you're paying attention to what you're doing while you're doing it, that's a start. And breathing is something we all do every day. But are we really doing it? Like actually breathing all the way in and all the way out? That's the first thing I teach everyone to do. To exhale all the way out. I know it sounds silly and simple, but it's not. Try it. And then next, notice if you're holding your breath. I discovered that I held my breath all the time when I was stressed or frustrated or probably just thinking too hard. And that was after I had already done a bunch of yoga training. Breath is really an awesome place to begin. Yoga's focus on breathwork, or pranayama, has been shown to regulate the autonomic nervous system, reducing stress, promoting a state of relaxation. And if you know me, you have heard me talk a lot about our nervous system. So this is a big deal. We are all under stress constantly, and that's okay, as long as we have the ways to go in and out of it to maintain that kind of rhythm that puts us back into a normalized state where our body is in what we call rest and digest, meaning it can function, it can do what it's supposed to do. Because stress turns off a lot of our systems and the parts of our brain that we really want online. Breath is a huge resource when it comes to managing stress in our nervous system. And as I mentioned earlier, yoga's been found to decrease symptoms of trauma, with Yoga Nidra as the front runner in effectiveness. I'll share more on this in the upcoming episode as well, where I'll expand on different practices, their intentions, and the research on their effectiveness. Trauma and chronic stress disrupt the nervous system, leaving us in a constant state of fight or flight, and yoga practices help reset this imbalance, improving resilience and emotion regulation. This is why that nervous system reset that I've been talking about for so long is so valuable to me. You've likely also heard of trauma-sensitive yoga, which I am eternally grateful for. It was developed not only as an adjunct treatment for PTSD, but simply to create spaces for individuals to feel safe to practice, to reconnect with their bodies, and to have a sense of containment and predictability that can allow for healing. I'm sure you can understand the vulnerability of trying something new, entering an unknown space, not knowing the people you're gathering with or the person leading. It can be scary enough without the challenges that trauma can pose. hypervigilance, and a really reasonable concern for whether or not you'll be touched, how you'll feel in your body, and what will happen if you get activated or overwhelmed, if you feel uncomfortable. Knowing your options and knowing that you're in a space that is built around what you might need is so immensely valuable. I'm so grateful to the yoga community, to trauma therapists and researchers who have come together to do this work and find what is most supportive to help people build or rebuild their connection to their bodies. Through interoceptive awareness, it's been shown to help people regulate when they're activated, to build a sense of safety and tolerance in experiencing their emotions, and an overall sense of safety, which is one of the hardest things to provide a person whose safety has been threatened or challenged. I offer everything I do through the lens of trauma sensitivity, whether it's a group or an individual EMDR session. I'm letting people choose where they place themselves in the room, and I'll tell you it's typically eyes on the door. I understand when someone isn't comfortable closing their eyes. Some people want to lay down, some people need to sit up, others do the best on the floor with me down there with them. Pillows, blankets, sandbags for weight, the right kind of music, and maybe some ice on the ready. Regardless of trauma history, we all have things that will make us feel more comfortable and more able. Regardless of trauma, most women do struggle in their relationship with their bodies, feeling disconnected, if not avoidant, or distressed in their skin. Yoga creates a bridge back to ourselves, not just through the movements. It provides tangible tools, the breathing exercises, mindfulness techniques, and approaches to meditation that people can use outside of therapy to manage stress and regulate. I often encourage my clients to start with those practices other than the asana, like breath, mantra, meditation, and chanting is one of my favorites and majorly powerful. I recommend these practices because I feel like they are building blocks that create a foundation to do this work of embodiment from. Embodiment, or being in your body, means truly having a felt connection to be able to experience sense and sensation and emotion. It can be a tough hill to climb for many. People need good resources, the kinds that offer everything that I've described today, from thought management to mood management to regulation and distress tolerance. And yoga practices offer us all of the above. With them, we can get through the harder things in life, like navigating body image, trauma, and the like. These practices are therapeutic. They foster mental and emotional resilience and healing. And while the ancient Indian text did not use the word psychology per se, you might be surprised to know that yoga and psychology are two words of very close meaning. Psychology comes from Greek, psyche, soul or mind, and logia, which is study. Yoga is translated to yoke, or to unite the mind, body, and spirit, or the divine. And you might recall me mentioning jnana yoga, the path of study. Both are concerned with matters of the mind and the soul, of understanding and overcoming. So while yoga in the United States is often reduced to fitness, its spiritual and philosophical roots overshadowed by marketing strategies, and its ancient wisdom turned into something posable and pretty, I hope you can appreciate a more expansive view. This is just the surface layer, the tip of the iceberg, but I hope that you understand not only the therapeutic value of yoga, but its greater significance, its historic and cultural significance. I came into yoga the Western way, fancy yoga pants and all. So I want to pay homage to this wisdom tradition and offer thanks to those who brought it to us. After thousands of years of knowledge passed from teacher to student to explore existence, we are now in a day and age where much has changed. But I hope that we can take more time to honor more of yoga in its true form. In the next episode, I'll share more about the practices, what the modern research and technology has shown us of its effectiveness, and we'll talk about big concepts like spirituality and the nitty-gritty of the practices and the why behind them. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode because this is one of the things I enjoy most in my work. If you're interested in learning more about it, there are many ways to do so, but I'll tell you the best would be to set up a call about the yoga of life. This 200-hour teacher training is just as much about you learning yourself as it is about becoming a teacher. Though you can do what you wish with it, the information in there is really invaluable. We'll expand on so much more than what we talked about here today because you can only fit so much into one episode. I'll link to the episode with Gretchen Mills, Doctor of Ayurveda, who will be co-leading that training with me. And if you are interested in these practices, you can go to the show notes to click the link to get on the list. I'm looking forward to teaching and sharing more in the new year. Get on the list to be the first to know and to get started. This has been another episode of In Our Skin. I'm so grateful for you being here. I hope that you'll take a minute to subscribe, to rate and review, or to share it with a friend who might be interested. It does so much for the podcast, and I really appreciate you taking that time. And until next time, take care.